Go.
I'm Veronica Sawchuk.
I'm Kristen Capelli.
And I am Ben Parker.
And we did our case study on the 1999 Columbine shooting. Basically, this is one of the most deadliest mass school shootings in the history of school shootings. And perhaps when you think of school shootings, Columbine is usually the first one that people think about because it was the very first one of this magnitude to happen. And it happened on April 20th, 1999, which was started out as a normal Tuesday morning and ended up not. It happened at Columbine High School in Littleton, Colorado, and what happened was two seniors, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, came to the school that day armed, prepared, and with a plan to do one thing, and that thing was just to simply hurt people. By the end of the day, they ended up killing 12 students, one teacher, injuring 21 students, 3 of which were injured just trying to escape the building after the chaos, and then they took their own lives. They did have an original plan, and their plan was basically they made a whole bunch of explosive devices, things that could harm people, guns, car bombs, and what their plan was is in the beginning of the day, they made these bombs out of propane tanks, and they put them into duffel bags, and they took them into the cafeteria. So if you think about a cafeteria, somewhere where you know if something happens in there, you're going to hurt a lot of people because there's a big amount. And they put these duffel bags under different desks, and it was kind of chaotic because you wouldn't be able to tell that they were there because a lot of book bags were everywhere. But they put them in there, and the original plan was when these bombs exploded, they would be staying outside the entrances and exits of the cafeteria with guns just to shoot people. And then they also had car bombs that were placed in 2 different parking lots. And these car bombs were supposed to be set off after the people who, not everybody came out the same exit, so anybody else who exited the school, usually rescuers and everybody set up shop in a parking lot. So these bombs were going to go off and kill even more people. But like I said, they had 99 explosive devices, and they really only planned on using their guns when to just shoot fleeing survivors. But like I said, that was their original plan, and thankfully that this did not happen. Their explosions in the cafeteria did not go off, and that was good because that would have killed a lot of people. But instead, at 11:19, when their bombs didn't go off, they decided that it was time for them to go into the school and fulfill their original goal, which was to kill people. So they just went in with guns, and they shot 2 people before they entered the school, one of which was paralyzed and one was killed. And when they went into the school, they went straight to the cafeteria. It said that they did this because when their bombs didn't go off, they wanted to figure it out. And they got to the cafeteria, shooting people along the way, just kind of injuring people. And then they started going through the hallways. They had, with their 99 bomb and explosive devices, they just kind of started throwing them and kind of causing chaos for everybody. Eventually they made it to the library, which is where they did the majority of their killings. They killed 10 people in the library, and the other 3 people were in the hallways and stuff. So the shootings started at 11:19, like I said, and they ended around 12:08 when Harris and Klebold made it back to the library. By this time, the SWAT teams had entered the building, so it said that the reason that they took their lives at this time was because they kind of knew they weren't going to make it any farther, and their plans didn't work out as they planned. So a teacher overheard them say 1, 2, 3, and then they shot themselves. Finally, terror had ended for the people in the school, but it wasn't over for the victims and the families of the people that were lost. There was everlasting effects and scars that were left on these people, and a lot of unanswered questions. And the sad thing is that those questions probably will never be answered because those 2 killed themselves, which made it impossible for them to explain themselves. But they did come up with 2 conclusions as to why they think that these 2 boys did this. The first one said that they did this to take revenge against bullies, and it said because a couple of people that they shot and injured, before they did this, they kind of interrogated them. So 2 people said that they before they shot them, they're like, hey, you're the one that called me a faggot, or you're the one that made fun of me. So I think this is why they came up with that conclusion. The second one was just that this massacre was inexplicable because these 2 were depressive psychopaths. And I kind of favor that one because to do something like this, you kind of have to be. But we can never really understand because they did kill themselves and they aren't here to tell their story. But they planned this event for about a year, and they actually dreamed of it being bigger. With these bombs, the bombs in the cafeteria would have killed hundreds of people, and the car bombs would have killed even more. So thankfully, it did not happen how they originally planned. But the sad thing is that still 13 lives were lost, and one life is enough. So we still think about those lives, but those people's families that were affected, they still think about these 13 people every day probably. And the one in the second one over, is the one teacher that was killed, and the rest of them are the students that they said were randomly chosen. And this kind of, for us, came to our case study question: is forgiveness even possible without an apology? And this is significant because these two killed themselves so they can't show their sorriness, their remorse, or even ask for forgiveness. So it's up to those who are left behind to decide whether that's possible.
Okay, so first of all, we want to go over what we believe an apology is. We think that a simple "I'm sorry" will not suffice. That doesn't mean anything. For an apology, there has to be meaning and suffrage behind it, or else it really doesn't mean anything to the family. Also, the act should never be repeated, or else all trust has been lost and the apology is overridden. So, also, we wanted to look into what is forgiveness. For us, we believe that forgiveness is more for the victim than it is for the perpetrator. We believe that forgiving means letting go of the hurt and the anger that this person has caused you. We found a quote by Arendt that says, "Forgiveness is letting go of all hope for a better past." And we also found a quote by an anonymous person that says, "Giving up not only any claim to repayment or punishment, but also any feelings of resentment, alienation, or desire for revenge." We believe those quotes kind of sum up what we think forgiveness is, because if you don't let go, you'll forever be living in the past, and you can't move on from that accident. So we have two sides to our question, the yes side and the no side. We found various quotes from different victims. As you can read, I won't read them all, but various quotes from different victims, and they've all had suffering of a loss of a loved one, but clearly you can be on either side of the argument. So what we had originally believed, that forgiveness without an apology was not possible. We felt that if someone does not apologize, then they don't deserve forgiveness. If they don't go out of their way to make an apology to you, you don't need to go out of your way to forgive them. And we also felt that someone in every situation needed to apologize, so that way someone could be held accountable for what had happened. What actual victims state, these are actual victims of the Columbine shooting. Mark Taylor says, "I have forgiven the shooters Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold and their families." And also Daryl Scott, who was the father of Rachel Scott, one of the children shot, said, "We made a choice to forgive and to move on and celebrate Rachel's life." I think these two quotes show that most of the people in the Columbine shooting, since it has been so long, I think it's 14 years now, they have moved on and forgave, but when it was so recent, they didn't forgive at first. But time heals all, I guess is how you can say that. The criteria that we think is necessary to forgive is we think the victim must be empathetic toward their perpetrator. We also think that you must understand that the past is over with and you have to move on in order to make a better life for yourself. And we also think that the act must be totally completed and it should never be repeated. So for this part, our conclusion is, in a situation like this, we believe that forgiveness without an apology is possible. After all of our research on the Columbine shooting and becoming empathetic with our victims' families and putting ourselves in their shoes, we realized that it's possible to forgive someone who has done you harm, because obviously they've also been suffering from some type of illness in order for them to do something like this. The reasoning behind our belief is that if someone makes a choice not to forgive, they'll be living in the past and they can never move on with their own lives. Also, when you don't forgive someone, you are letting that other person win. If they didn't apologize, they did it on purpose. So they don't want your forgiveness. And also, you will always be letting that perpetrator be a part of your life. If you forgive, you can move on and forget that they ever existed.
You're going to have to forgive me because I'm battling allergies right now, so bear with me. We kind of took this in two directions. We took one, obviously, very serious, deeper subject, and then one thing that is looked at as much more trivial in the grand scheme of things. The Browns get moved to Baltimore. How many of you are Browns fans? Okay, do you know something about the Browns getting moved to Baltimore? Okay. So, November 6, 1995, Art Modell, the current president then, proposed a move to Baltimore. He said, frankly, it came down to a simple proposition, and he had no choice. What we're going to find out is he did have a choice. Just by saying these quick actions at a press conference, legal action was taken by the fans who had season tickets over the next couple of years. Cleveland took legal actions due to a major sports team getting up and leaving their city. Save the Browns protests went on throughout Cleveland. At the last final home game, December 17th, 1995, there were 4 SWAT teams, 250 police officers, and 5 riot response crews at the game. They were anticipating something big. As we know, Cleveland sports fans are very passionate about their teams, to say the least. So they had the right to. Drew Carey, a lot of you might not know, but he's from Cleveland. He's a big supporter of Cleveland, and he actually held a fan jam protest where he got up and did some comedy and just was completely against the move. Steelers fans, I know there's a lot of them here at Mount, they actually protested with the Browns fans that were wanting the team to stay because they wouldn't have a rival anymore. There was pulled support from sponsors, and it led to a 5-11 season, one of the worst that they had at that time. A couple of things that have been said by a few famous people at the time of the proposal was, we've been wronged. I think it is incumbent upon the league, the commissioner, and Mr. Modell to make it right. We are very reasonable people, but it needs to be made right. That is said by then Mayor Michael Wright. And then one of the quotes that I found interesting was by Mike Ditka, who's a Hall of Fame coach and a Hall of Fame player. He said, Art Modell, wonderful man, made the greatest mistake ever made. He destroyed his reputation with one greedy move. It was based strictly on money. As you can see, this didn't just come down to a simple proposition. If you have Mike Ditka calling you out on national TV, you might have had to think about this a little bit more. So, February 8th, 1996, the NFL stepped in to kind of decide on what they thought should happen. They had a meeting to discuss this, and they decided that they couldn't stop the inevitable. The Browns would be moved to Baltimore. Luckily, the Browns' name would stay in Cleveland, and the Browns team, they would find a new owner, they would find a new team, would resume play later in the season of 1999 with a new 70,000 seat stadium built, funded completely by the NFL. The Browns' traditions and records would all stay. Modell would pay, that's supposed to say $12 million in charges, or in damages, and all of the lawsuits by Cleveland and the fans would have to be dropped. So why, Mr. Modell? Well, money, politics, and favoritism all play a major role. Mr. Modell was like a lot of sports owners. He had a lot of money invested in one thing. The Browns were quickly sinking, and he was going bankrupt. It was fight or flight for him, so he decided to say, hey, I'm leaving. So, he was going bankrupt. Cleveland wasn't doing very well at the time. The Browns weren't doing very well at the time financially. So, money played a major factor in it. Political backing in Baltimore also was a major role in this. They had a lot of financial support from key players in Baltimore. The mayor, a lot of the governor's office in Baltimore was also very supportive of it. And then baseball and basketball in Cleveland at the time had also taken precedent. Then Gund Arena and then Jacobs Field were both brand new, built stadiums. They were getting a lot of funding from Cleveland. The Browns weren't getting anything. Mr. Modell thought, why not just leave if they're not going to do anything for me? So there was a lot of aftermath. There were angry fans everywhere. Fans actually encouraged the suicide of Mark Modell, screaming up to his penthouse apartment, "Jump, just jump." There's a plane flying over that penthouse apartment saying, "Modell, you can't hide here, woof woof. Browns, mascot's a dog, haha." There were death threats. A term that was coined, I'll let you figure that out, it's not hard to. And then it also actually set a precedent for other teams that were leaving the city, or their respective cities. San Jose had a soccer team that left, and they kind of followed this same get behind the city support kind of system, whereas it hadn't really been done in the past. Here's a few pictures of what they had thought. And I see that we're running out of time, so just this past year, Armadale died. Twitter storm quickly became trending. Cleveland's true colors were shown. I don't condone any of the tweets on the next slide. They are strictly informational, if they can be at all. So I'll let you go ahead and read some of them. So Ben, what does this have to do with forgiving? I want to say it's clear from what you can read that the Browns fans never forgave. A lot of remorse for the death, not so much for the move. There are feelings of lies, greed, money, still resonant with the fans. And forgiving with no apology. He didn't apologize. Neither did the fans when cheer on his death. The overall conclusion, forgiveness without an apology is entirely subjective, based on the circumstances. If you want to go ahead and shut it off.
You're done?
Yeah, I'm not.